fact that I've been here for 27 years living in the UAE, and for me it's been such a pleasant and wonderful experience. So I'm now on a mission to discover other people's experiences on how they have made the UAE their home. This episode we come to the House of Wisdom, which was opened on the 9th of December 2020, and it is an iconic library and cultural centre designed by international architecture firm Foster & Partners. And my guest today will be Nada Sabri, hailing from Canada, who is an entrepreneur, an expert in business and consultancy, as well as an award-winning, best-selling author. This will be an interesting episode. So, let's hear about you. Who is Nada Sabri?
Well, first, thank you for having me on the show. It's a pleasure and an honor to be on the show and to be here at the House of Wisdom, and an incredible piece of work here. So it's a nice tour initially, and then when I look around a little bit more. But a little bit about me is for the last, well, I'm a strategist, innovator, and entrepreneur, and for the last 26 years, I've been specializing in the acceleration of growth, and that I've been working on for everything from unicorns, startup companies, Fortune 500s, Fortune 1000s, and even governments. And notably in my career, I was born and brought up in Canada, and my parents are originally from Egypt. They had migrated to Canada almost half a century ago, so it's quite a while ago. But essentially, so two of the most kind of notable companies that I've built from scratch and managed to successfully exit, and as part of the process that I work with people,
Great.
is one is Canada Online, or COL. In the mid-90s to late 90s, we'd exited by, we were going public but got acquired. We were one of the world's first internet service providers.
Okay.
And we were competing with AOL, which was obviously our much better, well-known.
Because it sounds always at COL and AOL.
AOL, exactly.
So you and, for example, your team, you actually set up one of the first internet providers, is that right?
Yeah, in 1994, when people didn't know what internet was and people didn't know what email was, people had just no idea what it was, and literally there was just a handful of domains that existed in the whole world, and the space was being highly defined at that point in time. So we entered at a time when it was an incredible time to enter this business. We started what we were called is a basement provider. Basement provider is very obvious from the term. We started in a basement, and eventually, we had tens of thousands of users across the country anyways, and including the US. So we managed to scale quite well, and it's purely because of, it's not just because the internet became big, but it was because at that stage we saw it as, it was a situation of the smaller fishes being eaten up, so small independent service providers like us were being eaten up by bigger providers, and then eventually the telcos, and that's kind of where we are today, where the rulers of the space are the telcos. You don't have many independent internet service providers anymore. But it was an interesting place and time to be. And for me personally, it was interesting because I had learned and knew at that point in time that everything I was going to do for the rest of my life was going to be related to innovation and technology, one way or the other, but all from a strategic perspective, because technology sometimes can be mistaken as the ends to a mean rather than a means to an end. And it should always be a means to an end rather than it being the other way around. So we can go into a whole topic around that, but won't go too deep into that. And then my other most notable company is a NASA space certified company that I built in the late kind of 2009, 2010, exited in 2017. As a part of that, I became the 43rd person in history to be certified by NASA. My invention was put into this, it's called the Space History Museum in Colorado Springs.
Okay.
And so it was quite a notable part of my life. And then when I exited my company, when my relationship was finished with NASA, who had supported me for many years with my innovation, had appointed me as a judge to the Space Technology Hall of Fame, where I work with 7 companies every year who are on the cutting edge of technology and innovation to help them crack the commercial side of it and how to turn it into an actual scalable business, which is what I do, help grow organizations. So at the end of that, I wrote a book that became a global bestseller, which is Ready, Set, Growth Hack. And I built a blueprint that can help anybody who would like to replicate doing that. And a blueprint essentially is a process that helps you find your formula, not a formula that's available for everybody, because it doesn't work like that.
Okay, we're going to come on to the book, but
Yeah.
I guess, and amazing that you said, you've worked alongside NASA, a judge for such technology. But if we go back a bit, when did you mentioned, how you started your career, but what made you come over to the UAE? What was the reason you came here?
Sure. So I came to the UAE in approximately 2001, 2002, so about 19 years ago or so. And I came out here because I had, as I was building these different tech companies, I ended up working with a lobbying firm out of Washington that ended up setting up a firm at that time, or let's call it a branch at that time in the UAE. And that's how I kind of ended up here. So, and it became home. I never left, actually, regardless of what was happening work-wise. I saw a nation of extreme prosperity and affluence, but an extremely progressive leadership that has a very keen eye on detail to ensuring that this country becomes the #1 destination on the planet for whatever it is they decide to do. So it was quite incredible.
What were your expectations before coming here?
Well, it wasn't actually very much. I'll tell you why. I mean, the first exposure was a Lonely Planet guide. I don't know if you remember those. Those days were pretty popular. And so you open up this Lonely Planet guide, and then, it's broken down into a structure about culture and how to get around. And that was kind of like my initial exposure, because there wasn't much information about the UAE. It wasn't really on the map at that time. It wasn't really well known. But I distinctively remember my very first experience. I get out at the airport, and I think it was like September or October, and it was like, it was very foggy and humid, extremely humid, and it just hits you in the face, and you're like, oh my God, where have I landed? But yeah.
It's like the initial getting off the plane.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I've lived in extreme temperatures. I've lived in -50 weather and +50 weather, and I by far greatly much appreciate the +50. Much greater than living in the cold.
-50.
Yeah.
So I guess, there's your expectations. You did mention when you arrived. What were your first impressions? When you actually arrived here in the UAE.
Well, my first impressions was I can see that there's a nation being built from scratch, and being a guy who built startup companies and organizations for high-speed growth, I felt I was exactly where I should be, a place that has a high level of ambition, but also pays attention to the details and have a very progressive way of looking at it. And so you can see that every day something is changing. Now, it took me a couple of years to kind of get a sense of the speed that's happening here in the UAE. The speed is unprecedented. I mean, if you come from the UK or Canada, an upgrade to a mall or a renovation to a mall would happen every decade or two, right? I mean, that would be like the change in your neighborhood. Here, every 2 weeks, there's a new road, literally, or a new building that just popped up. When did this happen, or when did that happen? So the speed is unprecedented. And it has its constructive side to it, so it drives a lot of innovation, competition, but it also has some challenges that come with it. And I've learned to understand the challenges that come with that in the sense of culture, right? And people are trying to catch up, and they can't necessarily breathe because they're like, this is just moving so fast. So people in the country, both expats and nationals, have had to become extremely agile and dynamic as individuals to work with this kind of environment. So it's very, very interesting.
When you came here, did you face any cultural change? Some people, when they go to a different country, they find it hard to blend in. But what we've noticed when we've been speaking to guests here is that everyone seems to fit in quite easily here. How was the experience for you?
I didn't feel much friction, to be honest with you, and it's because the UAE has so much to offer, and that's part of the brilliant part of the UAE. It offers something for everybody, right? So you can find your spot wherever it might be, and I think that's part of the UAE equation. That's the beauty of this country, right? But yeah, I mean, I felt it was frictionless coming here to the UAE and continuously living here for many years.
So when you first arrived here, maybe we could talk about in a bit more detail about what is, because you're involved in strategic advising, in entrepreneurship. So what was your career journey once you've arrived here?
Sure. So I worked with the organization that brought me out here, which was in the area of strategy, national strategy planning, and so forth. And then I was actually headhunted by the Dubai government as one of their first chief strategists at the economic department. And it was like almost kind of a dream come true for me that just became my product. And building the systems and policies that would build the foundation to enable the vision of this great country to become possible became a dream come true for me in many ways. It wasn't just living this great thing; it was actually being part of the product. And so I was very lucky because I became part of a lot of the initial things that you see around here, from scratch. I mean, literally like a canvas to the execution of it. And today, stepping back and looking at, 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, or 20 years ago, when this was just an idea in a strategy and how we executed that, and the challenges that come with it. I mean, the challenges that come with some of the ambitious projects that we've implemented is phenomenal, right? I mean, the economic impact is one side, but also the cultural impact or the policy impact, because you can't just do one thing and it doesn't affect everything else. And so that level of complexity is very dynamic here in the UAE because there's a lot of moving parts.
I mean, yeah. We're talking about obviously as well, the UAE, Sharjah as well. I mean, yeah. There's been a big push or a big increase. I mean, in entrepreneurship, and even just to mention where we are now, we're in the House of Wisdom now. Yeah. People who haven't been here may think that it's just a library, but as we've seen while we've been here, is that it's also a growing place for businesses, for entrepreneurship. We even happened to, I was mentioned as we were taking a walk around, we saw one of the CEOs of one of the big government, Sharjah government departments sitting here having a meeting, and we see many SMEs, small, medium enterprises having meetings here because they provide workspace, they provide meeting rooms. So even a place like this we can see that it's pushing through Sharjah, is pushing entrepreneurship, pushing people to innovate and to get into business.
Yeah, no, it's quite amazing. I mean, for me to sum it up, I mean, I see that the superpower of Sharjah is its grassroots capability. And that's kind of like the really unique part of Sharjah, and that's what makes it very strong in its own way. And what I mean by grassroots is if you kind of take a look at the history of Sharjah and everything that's been built here, it's always been built from a grassroots perspective. And because of that, it's a more family-oriented place. And because family is about grassroots, laying roots and growing from there. So if you step a little bit further back, you take a look at one, it's the educational side. I mean, Sharjah has been heavily investing in education. One of the best institutes in the country, including the region, sits here in Sharjah when it comes to education. That has helped education flourish in the Emirate and across the UAE itself. In fact, I know that they attract students from all around the region as well, because it's well known as a good quality institute. What that's done as well is it's reinforced the education system to, again, at a grassroots level, to start developing what's happening around it. The other element is small-scale industry. So small-scale industry, you drive into Sharjah, you may not think about it or see it because industry is a little bit further out, and you've got the beautiful Corniche and a lot of green space like what you can see out here is a beautiful change to just seeing sand. It's very nice. But the small-scale industries that they've been working on for the last 2-3 decades to just really scale up has played a large part in making Sharjah think in an industrial manner as well. And I think that's the ground that has laid the formula for entrepreneurship to take place and flourish in Sharjah. They've been very good at attracting major players, best-selling authors in the space, the entrepreneurs themselves, people who play as intermediaries in the space, whether it be at the top or bottom in the middle of the ecosystem, have all touched base here in Sharjah somehow. One of the early experiences, I think I shared it with you, was about 2009 or 10 approximately. So I and a group of people, we brought in Startup Weekend, and I don't know if you're familiar with what that is, but it's a self-organized, community-based program. It lasts 52 hours. That's why it's over a weekend, and that's why it's called Startup Weekend. And we build companies. We build startup companies. And so I remember the first one we did was in Dubai, and Sharjah had heard about it, and they're like, we want you to do the next one here. And so we did the next one at the beautiful building at the Chamber of Commerce with the dome, and that looks like a palace. It's just amazing. So I remember, we had so many students come out from the local universities here in Sharjah with incredible ideas. I mean, incredible fresh perspective on the world, with an incredible amount of energy to change what's happening around them. So it was extremely, extremely refreshing. I can see that happening here all the time.
You mentioned the Chamber of Commerce. Even the Chamber of Commerce, as well as many organizations, have really, even since 2009, we can see an amazing growth since then.
Yes.
On the projects, on the ideas, on the agreements, on a whole variety of things. Now,
Absolutely.
there's also an organization which I believe you also worked with, which is from Sharjah, based in Sharjah, called Sharjah, which is basically its whole idea is how to create, or how to cultivate, or how to help, should I say, assist and push people into entrepreneurship. And I think you also did some work with them, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so I've been with a few of their events where I delivered a talk at one of them. Another one was just pure networking and connecting with some of the key players. I've seen them evolve from just an idea to what they are today. I think they've classified themselves as a group now, because I think they've expanded on their policies in general. One of the most interesting developments I've seen, though, has been the idea of them galvanizing the investment side of the ecosystem, especially within Sharjah itself. So I get called in all around the world to look at different ecosystems, and it's one of the things I'm very blessed to have those opportunities. And I ask one very simple question: who puts the first dollar down, right? And if the government or those are in the policy space who are putting the first dollar down to get people to build companies, it's an ecosystem that will grow. If they're expecting startup companies and innovators and entrepreneurs to come and put the first dollar down, those kinds of ecosystems have a lot of friction and difficulty in actually accelerating growth, not just as an ecosystem, but for the companies that constitute that particular ecosystem. So I know I've seen that evolution happen in many parts of the world, and they've picked up on it here, that the funding element is extremely important. Who puts the first dollar down makes the biggest difference in the final outcome of the success of the ecosystem, including the organizations that do that.
Now we spoke about your books earlier, but maybe you could tell us a bit about your books here and what are they about?
Sure. So Ready, Set, Growth Hack is a blueprint that teaches people a very unique practice. It's been happening for a very long time, but it's only been coined in the last decade. And as it became coined, it became very well known for unicorns, which are startup companies worth billions of dollars, or for that are tech companies, or a combination of. Now, the funny thing is that growth hacking is not exclusive to startups. It's not exclusive to the tech industry. In fact, it's been applied by organizations like McDonald's over 50 years ago, which I talk about in my book. So one of the challenges, and it's a piece of advice I always like to give people, including those who are tuning in, if anyone ever tries to tell you that there's a silver bullet or that there's one formula for everything, that's actually not true. So what I do is I build a blueprint that which is a process that helps you find your formula. So if you and I started the same kind of thing at the same time in the same place with the same resources, the outcomes will be completely different, because your formula and my formula are very different. But what is the process that governs how you and I would be able to accelerate our growth is what I focus on. So these are some of the things I look at. So I teach things like asymmetrical warfare, warfare mechanics, underdog tactics, and how these things apply in the space of how a small organization would actually challenge a much larger organization and succeed at it, or how some of the large organizations use growth hacking as well. So about 1.5% of Fortune 1000 companies apply growth hacking, whereas 98% of unicorns use growth hacking at the center of their whole business model. Just to put that into perspective, yeah.
Okay, so that's the first book, obviously.
Yep.
Then we have down here your second book.
Yes.
Now, the first one is Ready, Set, Growth Hack, A Beginner's Guide to Growth Hacking Success. And now we see the second one is Growth Thinking.
Growth thinking.
So what is the difference between, I guess, first of all, growth hacking and growth thinking? And what is the difference between book number 1 and book number 2?
So the difference is that in the growth hacking space, there's no methodology that actually brings this space together, and that's what growth thinking is. It's a design methodology that helps you take an idea to action in a snap. The reason that was a problem was that in the growth hacking space, we had people applying practices in very unstandardized ways. I mean, you can do anything you want, but there was no way to communicate it in a uniform way. So teams were not able to collaborate properly, or the communications of specifications from business to tech, tech to business wasn't working very well. So it's almost like the design thinking for growth thinking, or the business model canvas, if you've ever seen or used that. This is the equivalent for when it comes to growth. So the secret behind growth thinking is, I call it peanut butter and jelly. So peanut butter and jelly, if you hear about it, sound like they don't go together, or chocolate and chili. And what the analogy behind it is basically structure and creativity. And usually structure and creativity can feel like they're kind of toxic. They don't really want to go together. So if someone is overly creative, they may not like structure, or people who are overly structured may not like creativity because they feel that it's a distraction. So a good methodology finds a balance between the two, and that's what I call the peanut butter or jelly, or the chocolate and chili, and it allows the two to work together in harmony.
Okay, and have you seen companies who you've helped, to like some small medium enterprises that you've helped within Sharjah, within the UAE, that they've taken your tips and they've been able to successfully grow?
Well, growth thinking, I've got about 5,000 growth hackers globally that use this methodology that's including prior to the publishing and after the publishing. Here in the UAE, I run a global program, and I have quite a few startups here that are part of it. It's called the 10-Day Growth Hacking Challenge. And in 10 days, we 10x the growth of a company using 3 growth hacks, using the methodology in the growth thinking book. So I work exclusively with the individual. Each challenge is worth $10,000, and we see some incredible results. And that's the whole idea, is to get incredible results in a short period of time, and then so they can further develop based on the learnings that they would learn in growth thinking. So the growth thinking book has a spot for about 20 growth hacks in there. The first 3 are part of the challenge, and the remaining 17, if you finish in 60 days, I enroll you in my all-star program. And that's being defined at the moment because we have quite a few challengers that we're still working through the system at the moment.
Sure. Yeah. I guess what I'd also like to ask, going back to Sharjah, because we've been talking about how we've seen Sharjah grow from the perspective of entrepreneurship and SMEs, etc. But this is more of a personal thing. I mean, what are the kind of places? Everyone we interview has certain places they like about Sharjah for different reasons. So what are the places that stand out to you in Sharjah?
For me, on a personal, what jumps out is the food culture. Sharjah has an incredible food culture to it, and again, very grassroots. That's the thing about Sharjah, everything's grassroots. But for me as a location, I enjoy the Corniche, especially the green area, and as you get to the mosque, and then the Blue Dome, I always call it the blue market, or the blue top market.
I think it's called Central Market.
Central Market, yeah. So I used to go there long ago with my family, and on the weekend, pick up a few things and head back to Dubai. But it's amazing. I mean, the greenery and the spaces in Sharjah are amazing. As you can see even here from out the window, as I was pulling up to here, I was actually telling, the taxi driver, I was like, I just love the green, this open space. He was like, yeah, you feel just relaxed and comfortable.
And that's something we often see. People often say that, they feel that Sharjah is so, like you said, grassroots, so family-orientated, so relaxing at the same time, with all of its development, with all of its technology and entrepreneurship, and some amazing episodes we've had talking about how it's just shooting up, and in many areas being a pioneer, not just in the UAE, but regional and even internationally wise. But at the same time, it keeps that grassroots, it keeps that culture, it keeps that family-orientated place.
Well, that's the superpower. I mean, that's the superpower of Sharjah, is grassroots. So if you look at any aspect of Sharjah, from my perspective, that is anyways, I always see that its strength is from the grassroots perspective. So if you look at the food culture, it's a grassroots thing. If you look at literally outside, I mean, grass everywhere, right? Grassroots again, right? So same thing with the ecosystem that they built here. It's all grassroots based, which is amazing.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, it's been great having you here, and hearing your side of your story. And everyone has a different angle, and yours has been very interesting, talking about entrepreneurship and being able to connect that with Sharjah. So thank you for coming on.
No, thank you. I mean, it's an honor and pleasure to be here, Ismail, and be on the program. It's always such an honor to be invited to such programs and be at such a wonderful place like the House of Wisdom. And for those who are tuning in, I mean, I really suggest for people to visit the House of Wisdom. I plan to bring my family. Actually, I've seen pictures and videos about it, and there was maybe a documentary once I saw on TV, but I'd never had the chance to be here. So thank you for the opportunity to bring me here. I plan to definitely bring my family here and spend a bit more time here. It's very, very relaxing. And like you pointed out, is people using it as a place to actually do some thinking, which is amazing. A place that just opens up the mind with that. You see how bright and beautiful it is in here. So it's very nice. Thank you for hosting me, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you.